Webster defines crunch time as a critical moment or period, like the end of a game, when decisive action is needed. Every sports fan knows this time in the game. Your palms sweat just a little more, your heart races just a little bit faster, and you live and die with every play until the final seconds tick off the clock and you're either celebrating a victory or disappointed by the defeat. The team at Crunch Time Sports Advantage Network understands just how critical these moments are. For us, it begins as soon as the next set of games are on the board. We evaluate the opening lines and any breaking news throughout the week. We cover each game inside and out, whether it's from inside the locker room to a huddle down on the field, the court, or the ice. We take you inside the meeting room with scouts, coaches, and executives. We have our fingers on the pulse of all the sports that we cover: the National Hockey League, NBA, college basketball, college football, and the National Football League. We are the Crunch Time Sports Advantage Network, and we're here to help you find your sports advantage. After all the data has been crunched, we then turn it over to Kenneth for the best analysis around. His unique perspective in both understanding the data and how it applies to the game and how you win is the Crunch Time Sports Advantage. Are you ready? The Crunch Time Jet is fueled and ready for takeoff, and the Crunch Time Express is about to leave the station. Your VIP pass has been approved, so all aboard.
Welcome to the 2024 College Football Team Autopsy Report. An autopsy report is a document that summarizes the findings of an autopsy, an examination of a body after death. It includes details of the examination, tests, and observations performed, as well as the cause and manner of death. Just like a real autopsy report, the Crunch Time Sports Advantage Network College Football Autopsy Report examines a team's body of work after the season has concluded. This report includes a review of the team's season win total and whether they met expectations, key offensive, defensive, and special teams metrics that shaped the season, a deep dive into coaching decisions, including situational play and fourth down aggressiveness, a final season grade, evaluating execution, performance in key moments, and consistency, the final verdict, analyzing what went right, what went wrong, and what must be fixed for 2025. With the 2024 season in the rearview mirror, it's time to examine the patient. To present the findings, we have called in our Chief Medical Examiner and Senior Analyst, Kenneth.
And welcome into the Crunch Time Sports Advantage Network Team 2024 Team Autopsy Report. Folks, it's always a pleasure to be with you. And I have on the autopsy table this morning the Michigan State Spartans. And folks, over the next 28 minutes, I'm going to give a deep autopsy report into where this program is right now, and starting with the head coach. Jonathan Smith just completed his first year as the head coach at Michigan State, spent the previous 6 years as the head coach there in Corvallis with Oregon State. His record at Oregon State is going to be a little deceiving. In 6 seasons, 34 wins, 35 losses, so a sub-500 winning percentage. However, this is why we like to take a deep dive into this program. It took him literally the first 3 years there at Oregon State to really kind of get that program back going and being functional. His last 3 years is what we really want to pay attention to. 2021 finished 7-6. 2022 10-3, and then 10-3, and then in 2023 8-4. So over his last 3 full seasons, you're looking at a record of, if I'm adding this right, 25 wins to 13 losses. So we saw a definite improvement under Coach Smith there, and that's why he was able to parlay that job into Michigan State there. Kind of like what we saw at Oregon State, it's going to take him a year, maybe even 2, to really kind of get this program invigorated and moving towards what he envisions this program to be. So I would not be too concerned about that 5-7 season if I'm a Michigan State fan. And that's going to be largely due to the report that we're going to give you here over the next 25 minutes. If you're watching on YouTube, if you're streaming this on our Twitter handle at CrunchTimeVIP, want to say thank you for joining us. You can also check out any previous autopsy report of anything that we've done this up until this point on any of those platforms. You can also check out our website at crunchtimesportsadvantage.com. To our podcast listeners, don't worry. Every data that I'm going to reference on the screen, I'm going to make sure that you're fully covered here on the podcast. So let's start with the betting win total there, because that's always where we're going to start. And this team back in June had a season win total of 4.5. Now, if you took that over, you were banking on Jonathan Smith getting you at least 5 wins. He absolutely got you to the pay window. Shout out to the late, great Gordon Soley for that one there. Now, so you were able to win the season win total bet if you took it. Now, when we look at our in-season composite win total, 3 very different but highly predictive data points that we use to determine a team's record based on how they played in the season. We had a slight downtick on the Spartans. We only had them at 4.0, so they absolutely won a game that metrically we feel like they probably should have lost, and that was how they got to that win total of 5. Speaking of schedule, 2 very different parts of your schedule we look at from a overall evaluation standpoint. Your strength of schedule. Who did you play? And when you play in a big-time conference like the Big Ten or any of the other Power 3 leagues, you really only control about 20 to 25% of your schedule, your non-conference. As far as your in-conference schedule, it is a pure luck of the draw. Did you draw a very difficult schedule, or did you draw some teams that are in the bottom of your conference instead of at the high water mark there? So that's your strength of schedule. How we look at your opponents from a power ranking standpoint, and then your strength of record. This is something you have no control over. Think of it as like your opponent's winning percentage. The better your opponent's winning percentage is, the higher your strength of record is going to be. So for Michigan State, 0.486, that was 35th out of 134 qualifying Division I teams last year. When we look at their strength of record, 0.621, 13th best. So their team's win-loss record was even better than their strength of schedule. That means we may see some inflated wins here by some teams on Michigan State's schedule. Let's go ahead and pull up that graphic for our listeners on YouTube and Twitter. And when we look at their opponent's win-loss record, Fresno State was 6-6. Maryland was 4-8. Stepped out and played an FCS opponent in Prairie View A&M. Boston College was 7-5. And then here's where the big boys come in. Ohio State 10-2 in the regular season. Oregon undefeated 12-0 last year. Iowa was 8-4. Michigan was 7-5. America's team in the Indiana Hoosiers was 11-1. We talked about this team already. If you didn't get a chance to listen to that podcast, you absolutely can go back and listen. Iowa was 9-3. Purdue 1-11, and Rutgers was 7-5. We talked about some possibly overinflated win totals there with some teams based on how they were evaluated from a pure power ranking standpoint. I think you can point out a couple of those teams there. I said I would find a win that this team got that maybe from a metric standpoint probably should have come up on the losing end. And I think I'm going to go to the season opener for Michigan State, and that's the game against, second week against Maryland when they won that game 27-24. This was a really sloppy game by Michigan State there, but was able to get the win. But metrically, when I look at all of the data points from that game, probably should have been a game that they lost. But credit a team for winning games that they absolutely lost, and that's a sign of a team that has the potential to kind of grow there. Now, let's take a look at the quality of defenses that this Spartan offense faced last year. We use a baseline number of 68 because that's how many Power 4 teams we had last year. And when we look throughout their schedule, Boston College, power ranked 55th. Ohio State, number 1 power ranked defense last year. Oregon, also a top 10 defense, coming in at number 10. And then a series of teams in the 20s there. Iowa was 22nd. Michigan was 21st. Indiana was 27th. Illinois, was 54th. And Rutgers was 64th. So 8 of their opponents finished inside of that top 68. Talking about an average power ranking of 47. This is probably a defense that would have probably been on maybe a 7-5 team there. So while they played some really good defenses last year, did play just a couple of teams there outside of the top 80, just 2. Maryland was 80th, and Purdue, we know how bad that team was, 117th power ranked defensively. Now, let's take a look at the offensive breakdown. I'm going to give you 3 data points here. The NCAA average for that category. I'm going to give you the Spartans data point for that category, and then I'm going to give you our adjusted number based on opponent for that category. So let's start right there with the points per game. And last season, the average team scored 28 points per game. The Spartans really struggled, only 19 points per game. So 9-point differential there. When we adjust for opponent, just a slight uptick to 20.3. Passing yards per game, 227 yards was the average last year. The Spartans, again, struggled mightily, 218 yards per game passing. And when we adjust for opponent, goes down to 211 yards per game. As far as their rushing offense, average team last year, 160 yards rushing. The Spartans could not run the ball at all last year, 115 yards per game. But when we adjust for opponent, do see an uptick to 140 yards per game there. So a little bit more respectable there. And then as far as total offense, 387 yards was the average. Spartans were at 333. When we adjust for opponent, it goes up about 17 yards to 351. Let's take a look at some of their advanced numbers from last season. Average team finished scoring on a drive about 40% of the time. The Spartans, either a touchdown or field goal, on 38% of their drives, so just a little bit below the average there. When we talk about drives ending with a touchdown, putting up that big 7 on the board instead of just 3, 29% was the average last year. Spartans really struggled with putting the ball in the end zone. Adjusted 22% of their drives, so you're talking about less than 1 out of every 4 of their drives ending with a touchdown. Got to be better than that. And then on third down conversions, average team 39%. When we adjust for opponent, that does go up to 35%. So still a little bit below the average team last year. And why does a team struggle with putting together scoring drives? 2 major factors in that: allowing sacks and turning the ball over. This team allowed 35 sacks in the games we tracked last year. That's 11 more than the average team gave up during the regular season. And then you compound that with 19 turnovers. Problematic. Now, let's take a look at our 3 E's. The 3 E's are how effective explosive, and efficient your offense was last year. Eye-popping numbers here for Michigan State, and not the good kind. 102nd in effectiveness, 103rd in explosiveness. In their best category, efficiency, they were 96th. 134 teams last year, and this is where your offense ranks. Not hard to imagine why you were 5-7 last year. The Spartans ended the regular season as our 101st ranked offense in 2025. If you had to bullet point this offense, inefficiency and turnovers absolutely held them back last year. Let's take a look at the defense and see if there's any redeeming qualities for the defense in 2024. Again, we're going to stick with that baseline of 68. So Maryland, how good were the offenses that this Michigan State defense faced last year? Maryland was 68th. Boston College was 54th. Buckeyes had the 8th best power ranked offense for us during the regular season last year. Oregon was 11th. Iowa was 30th. Indiana, 3rd best power ranked offense for us last year. America's team was no joke last year on the offensive side of the ball. Illinois, 45th, and then Rutgers to end the season was 46th. You're talking about an average power ranking of 48. Again, this offense would probably be on about a 7-5 team last year. So facing really good quality defense, offenses there for Michigan State's defense did face just two opponents outside of the top 90. Pardon me, Fresno State was 98th, Purdue 108th in offense. Now, let's give you just the 2 data points for the defense. I'm going to give you their accounting stats number and then our adjusted number. Points per game, 26.1 points per game. When we adjust for opponent, see a slight downtick there to 24.6. So about a 1.5 improvement there. As far as the passing yards per game allowed, virtually identical. 207 yards per game allowed when we adjust for opponent, slight uptick to 210. Rush defense, this is where this team absolutely hung their hat last year. 125 yards per game rushing, even when we adjust for opponent, it just goes to 127. So a full 27 yards better than the average team last year. And then total defense, solid. Matter of fact, I would say even better than solid. 333 yards per game total offense allowed. When we adjust for opponent, goes to 336. So really solid job of not allowing opponents' offenses to really rack up some major yards, despite some of the data points that we saw there from this team from an offensive standpoint. Now, let's take a look at some of the advanced numbers here. Their opponents adjusted drives ending with a score, either a touchdown or field goal, 42%. Their opponents' drives ending with a touchdown, 29%. And then their opponents' conversion rate adjusted on third downs, 42%. Again, hovering right around the average there last year. This team could not generate a lot of sacks either. Only 16 sacks there. And their opponents absolutely love going for it on fourth down because of the conversion rate. 12 out of 15 attempts, 80% conversion rate is what their opponents were on fourth down. This team played horrible fourth down defense there, allowed drives to continue way too many times. Only forced 11 turnovers there. So we're going to see a negative turnover differential here for this team. Special teams. Solid, not great. 80, let's call it 90% on their field goal conversion rate. That was very good. This team only averaged 3.8 punts per game, 42.6 average per punt. Respectable. You want to see a team that's struggling on offense, flip the field just a little bit more there with the punt game. But like I said, not horrible there. What is horrible is that negative turnover differential there of a -8. That puts you at 122nd there in college football last year. But here's a positive. Team didn't beat themselves with penalties. 6.3 penalties per game, about 60 yards per game in penalties. That's pretty close to the average last year. Let's talk about the head coach, Jonathan Smith, in his first year in East Lansing. From a coaching and situational play standpoint, not bad last year. Okay, had a little technical difficulty with the headset there. So let me go back through Coach Smith's games there from a coaching and situational standpoint. So when we look at it, 5 one-score games last year, Spartans were 3-2 in those contests, 60% there. Here's where he's really struggled there. We're talking about a coach that went 1-5 against quality opponents there. So absolutely struggled when they stepped up in weight class last year. And for a transitional head coach, that's kind of to be expected there. As far as Coach Smith being aggressive going for it on fourth downs, we're looking at a 15% attempts going for it on fourth downs. That puts him 52nd out of 144 qualifying head coaches last year, which makes sense when you look at their conversion rate. 12 conversions out of 23 attempts last year. That is about where the average was last year. So I'm going to briefly take a look at their quarterback because he will be back this year, Aiden Childs. 12 games last year, only completed 59% of his completion percentages as a first-year starter. Definitely got to get that increased there. 2,415 yards passing. Solid, but not great. 13 touchdowns, 11 INTs. So got to get the touchdowns up, the INTs down. Now, let's take a look at this team splits in the games that they won versus the games that they lost. And from a offensive standpoint, this is kind of about where you would expect this team to be. In those 5 wins, averaging 28 points per game, 232 yards passing per game on 30 attempts, 7.6 yards per attempt, not pushing the ball down the field with great success, 12.8 yards per completion. So those wide receivers definitely improved the passing yardage there for the Spartans last year. The run game was phenomenal in those victories. 36 rushing attempts for 167 yards per game, 4.6 yards per rushing attempt there. And when we look at it on third downs, this team converted about 41%, was 3 out of 4 on fourth down attempts, converting 75%, committed just 7 turnovers in those 5 victories. In their 7 losses, 13 points per game, 208 yards per game passing on 29 attempts, 7.2 yards per attempt, 12 yards per completion. The rushing attempts, 31 times per game, but that number's cut in half, 79 yards per game rushing in those losses, 2.6 yards per rushing attempt. The team struggled to run the ball in those losses, probably against some of the better teams that they went up against as well. I think that's a direct correlation. 33% on third downs and just 47% on fourth down. Attempted 19 fourth down attempts in those 7 losses. So going for it and not converting a high percentage there, recipe for losing games. And then when you look at this, 12 turnovers in those 7 losses, not only are you turning the ball over on downs, but you're actually giving the ball away, whether it's an INT or a fumble. So got to get better there. As far as their defensive metrics go, in 7 losses, giving up 35 points per game, 214 yards per game passing on 28 attempts. So not a big swing there from the games that they lost to the games that they won. 7.8 yards per attempt, 12.3 yards per completion. Here's where we see the inverse of what we saw with their offense. Opponents were running the ball 7 more times per game, about 37 rushing attempts, 168 yards per game rushing, almost 90 more yards allowed in the games that they lost, 4.4 yards per rushing attempt. Their opponents converting third downs at a 47% clip, 83% on fourth down, so even higher conversion rate there, and only forced 4 turnovers total in those 7 losses. So let's go ahead and talk about what went right, or I should say what went wrong for Michigan State last year, and then give you their final grade, and then we'll get to the final verdict. What I saw go wrong for Michigan State last year was an offensive line that absolutely struggled, gave up way too many sacks. He talks about the turnover issue. You can't have that kind of turnover differential and expect to win a lot of games, especially in a conference like the Big Ten. And then, of course, the poor execution there on third down. Let's go ahead and get to the final grade. All right, so the final grade for the Michigan State Spartans, we're going to give their first-year head coach, Jonathan Smith, there in East Lansing, a C-. Why? We like the fact that they showed some fight in close games, even though they came up short. What we didn't like was the offensive inconsistencies. Quarterback play has got to get better in his second year starting there and going through his first full run there as the quarterback at Michigan State in Aidan Chiles. We expect to see a little bit bump in his production there. The final verdict. Michigan State was competitive at times, but ultimately fell short due to their inconsistent play, struggling defense, and costly turnovers. To improve, they must protect the quarterback better, reduce the turnovers, improve execution on third downs. Michigan State's 2024 season was marked by a resilient defense overshadowed by an offense that absolutely struggled and made critical mistakes. While the defense managed to contain yardage effectively, their offense inability to produce points consistently coupled with turnover problems hindered this team's success. Michigan State's competitiveness in close games indicates potential, but overcoming self-inflicted wounds needs to be essential for their future improvement there. So what does this team need to do in 2025? I'm going to give you 3 keys here for the Spartans. You got to enhance the offensive production. As I mentioned, it starts with better offensive line play, and then it starts with better play calling by the offensive coordinator and execution by that quarterback. 2, ball security. This has got to be absolutely paramount for this team. Committed 19 turnovers. You want to see that cut down to about 12 there for the Spartans in 2025. Reducing those turnovers, reducing the sacks will absolutely increase the efficiency in those 3 E's that I talked about. And then finally, the in-game adjustments. From a play calling standpoint, you have to be much more dialed in 2024 as far as what plays you're going to run and how efficient you are in executing those plays. Pare down the playbook quite a bit and focus on what you can do well here in 2025. If the Spartans focus on these 3 areas, I think that they can be much more successful and competitive in 2025.
Thank you for tuning into this podcast. We hope you enjoyed today's episode and our deep dive into all things college football. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review the show on your favorite podcast platform. And if you're watching on YouTube, be sure to like this video and hit that subscribe button. You can follow us on Twitter at CrunchTimeVIP for updates, insights, and more content. And make sure to visit our website at CrunchTimeSportsAdvantage.com for in-depth blogs, game previews, and information about our Crunch Time Express handicapping packages. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you next time for our next patient on the 2024 College Football Autopsy Report.